In this video, I'll be talking about the various characteristics of life. So first off, living things have a different molecular composition than non-living things. So what do we mean by this? Well, living things have proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. So these are all called biomolecules, and they're very important for life, and we'll be talking a lot more about them in this course. Secondly, living things require energy and raw materials. So raw materials and energy are taken in, and they're converted to materials and energy that are needed for life. So let's use the example of you eating a sandwich. You eat a sandwich, you convert some of the materials within that sandwich, which is going to be things we just talked about, things like proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. You're going to convert those by breaking them down into component parts that we can then use to synthesize molecules that we need in our own bodies. So by eating a sandwich, you actually bring in raw material that your cells will use to build up your body. At the same time, you need energy. So humans, we're not able to photosynthesize like plants, and so we get our energy through food by breaking down chemicals, again, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids, breaking them down, and we can actually derive energy from these molecules. Now, there is a term for all of this. It's called metabolism. So this is the process by which foods are taken in and converted into materials and energy that are needed for life. So these are metabolism is essentially the sum total of all the various chemical reactions in your body that are going through this process of taking in materials, converting it into materials for your own body, and also taking in materials and using those materials for energy. Now, there's a little bit of an exception for some certain organisms. So, for example, plants, they're actually able to take in raw materials again, but they're able to take in very simple raw materials, not the biomolecules that I talked about a second ago, but very simple molecules such as CO2, which is just carbon and two oxygens, and other various simple raw materials. And they can use energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis to build up complex biomolecules such as glucose and fructose, which are sugars, which we'll be talking about more later. Moving on to the next point, all living things are composed of cells. So something is living if it at least has a single cell. So a single-celled organism would be called a unicellular organism. And an example of this would be bacteria. Bacteria are unicellular organisms. They're relatively simple compared to us. Now, humans are multicellular organisms, meaning that we are composed of many, many cells. And you can see here in this picture, cells lining the human stomach. So moving on to the next thing. The next topic is homeostasis. So living things maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment. Now, why is this important? Well, our cells are sort of spoiled. They require a certain temperature. So for example, in humans, our core body temperature is 37 degrees centigrade. And our cells also require a certain pH. So pH is a measure of the hydrogen ion concentration. This is something we'll talk about more later in this class. But essentially tells us about the acidity of the environment. So our cells require a certain temperature and also a certain pH. And this helps keep them healthy and alive. And so we'll talk, this is going to be a major theme. Many of our organ systems and the way that our body is organized is to try and maintain a relatively stable internal environment. Okay, maybe I haven't completely explained what internal environment is. What is that exactly? Well, most of our cells are actually bathed in fluids that are internal to our body. And it's very few cells, so for example, we have skin cells and so forth, that are actually in contact with the external environment. Now, homeostasis is actually a little bit more complicated than just the maintenance of the relatively constant internal environment. It's also used, this term is also used for the process by which an organism can maintain this internal stability while adjusting for a change in external conditions. To make this point more concrete, let me give you an example. Let's imagine it's summer and you're inside and the room is air conditioned and everything, and you're very comfortable. And then you suddenly walk outside and it's very hot and very humid. Well, what's going to happen? Well, you'll immediately start sweating. You'll also have your body will essentially redirect blood flow to the blood vessels that are under the surface of the skin. And this will help to offload some of that heat also. So again, there's a lot of physiological things that are going on in your body as you move from a cool environment to a hot environment, just to maintain your core body temperature at around 37 degrees centigrade. So again, this is a major topic, and we'll come back to it later. What else do organisms do? Well, they all respond to the external environment. Even something as simple as a bacterium will actually move in response to a gradient of chemicals, whereas as it looks for food. Plants will actually, a house plant, for example, will also move or turn its leaves so they can pick up more light for photosynthesis. All animals and plants and other organisms can also grow and reproduce. So that's a major theme throughout this course. Finally, populations of living things all can evolve. So individuals can't evolve. We're each given a certain genetic heritage, and that's essentially the genes that you have for life. However, within a population, which is many individuals of the same species, you can have some variation in genes, and basically some genes combinations will work out really well given the environment, and those organisms will have more offspring. And so over time, it's actually possible for the one species to essentially diverge into multiple species. So it's called speciation. And so you can actually have the derivation of more than one species in this way. Of course, that takes a lot of time, many generations. But over time, and we're talking about really millions of years, this process of evolution has given us the wonderful diversity of life that we see out there. So if you just look out your window, you see an oak tree, you'll see a squirrel, you see, chipmunks, all sorts of wonderful things out there. And it's really because of evolution that we have all of this. We have different species evolving and changing and arising and so forth, and some going extinct over time, of course, also. So again, this is the idea of evolution is a major concept and a major idea that we'll be coming back to throughout this course. Okay, so that pretty much covers it. We've talked about some major themes that we'll be coming back to throughout this course that help us define what life is.